All right, men, welcome to today's episode of Strong Men, Strong Marriages. I'm here today with Don Manning from Crazy Cool Family. Welcome, Don. It is so great to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, I was excited to meet Don. We connected for kind of over podcasts. His podcast also is called Crazy Cool Family. And just on his website here, he says their goal is experience a family where kids love Jesus, love you, love each other, and have God-inspired purpose in life. That's the Crazy Cool Family way. For me, like that's just a very inspiring statement. That's something that definitely resonates. That's what I would love to have for my family. And yeah, so just wanted to introduce you guys to Don and Suzanne and their work. Um, but yeah, I mean, for you, Don, what got you started doing this? What made you want to get
Well,
into this work?
first of all, 7 kids have something to do with it. And really it did. I mean, so we have 7 children that are, we go from 33 to 17, 4 girls and then 3 boys. And, what started this for me was I'm an old guy now, so I do my parenting not in years, but in decades. So, right now we're starting our fourth decade of parenting, with our, and with grandkids, starting our first decade or with grandkids. But I remember kind of being at the end of that first decade. I've got 4 little girls, and I really want to be a good dad, but I'm realizing I don't know what I'm doing,
Hmm.
And I also realized that if I screw this up, I get one chance at it. And I was kind of, I've always been kind of a visionary, always been kind of looking ahead. And much to my wife's dismay, sometime I'm just always, wanting to stir things up. But I was like, in this case, I think it helped us because I said, I looked out ahead of me and I just saw people that were with the best intentions were not keeping the hearts of their kids. And I was like, okay, that's not going to be me. I don't know what's going to, but and yet when I went and studied things, it's just such a fragmented thing to go. And the church really wasn't teaching me to be a parent. It was doing a great job of discipling me, but it wasn't doing a great job of teaching me to be a parent. I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. And so I just started doing a lot of homework. And I told God 2 things. I just said, I'm going to give you 2 things. One is I'm going to learn all I can about being a dad and a husband. And the second thing is I'm going to give it all I got. And if that doesn't work, then it's your fault, God. I'm gonna put it all on you. Okay. So I'm joking, but it's like, I just said, I can only do so much. I'm going to believe, I'm going to go. And then I started looking at everything. I'm like, man, well, 2 things happened. One of them is I started looking at it. I said, man, somebody just needs to write me a guidebook. Here's the vision for raising a Christian family. And yeah, there's lots of books on issues and discipline and all this stuff. But I mean, who's ever written something just that says, here's your vision for family. Here's what God says about family. And also, as we started doing our homework, we made some pretty radical shifts, and we found it worked. We had we had young girls or teenage girls as we were going in that second decade that loved the Lord and loved us, and we started seeing how to reach their hearts. And it was an amazing thing. And 2 things happened with that is that people started asking us, we've been at the same church for 30 years, and really within our church, they started saying, hey, what are you guys doing? Okay, what are same questions we were asking people, ahead of us. And I just felt like the Lord said to us, I've given you the gift of family. I've shown you some things as you've been diligent in studying, but I've given you a revelation. Now I want you to go share it with others. And that was the birth of Crazy Cool Family. We just started teaching it in our church to anybody that listened, just the young couples that were behind us. And out of it, it's grown into a book, a podcast, a membership site. We're going to, I just got back from Mexico City doing a conference. It's just crazy what God has done, as we just were continue, because we were just really have a passion for helping parents have a passion for family and have a vision for family.
Yeah, love it. So yeah, I mean, as far as my audience, the guys that are listening to this, so high achieving Christian men. I know are successful in your business and career as well. I think, what are so for a guy like me or like the guys listening that we were talking about this right before the interview, but like are pretty good about setting goals for career and personal, development and things like that. Um, what are some of the common problems you see them do, like that makes it harder for, like I like how you said it, to like have their kids' hearts, to win their kids' hearts. Like,
Yeah.
what are some of the
Well,
mistakes guys will make when they're when they're parenting?
let me give you my own scenario as an example. So I go to the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, and I'm going to get I decide about my sophomore year, I'm going to get a master's in tax accounting. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to be challenged and learn, but then I really wanted to be a chief financial officer of a company. And so I set my goals and I set my dreams, and I get my master's in tax accounting. I get my goals to make the perfect resume coming out of college. So I get the best job with Ernst and Young, one of the top accounting firms. And so and so then I become one of their, I learned that I don't want to be a partner in a public accounting firm. So I go to work there for a couple of other companies on my way to being a CFO, which I achieved probably 10 or 15 years into my work life, career. Since then, my career took another path as God led me, but I'm using that as an example because my career strategy was there. I had a vision for my career, and a lot of guys do. I want to go into sales and I want to make money with this, or, I want to be a doctor. I want to be this. And man, most of the guys I talk to, you say, what's your vision for your marriage and family? And they say, I don't know. It's kind of my wife's job. It's kind of just something that I don't know. I'm just going to go raise kids, and, I don't really know a lot about it. But in the meantime, we love our kids, and but yet we don't really have a vision for it. And so what I believe most men struggle with is, one, they don't know how to have a vision for their family, and the second thing is we're really not that great at relationships. And so and we really don't understand how to connect with our kids. And it's super different than work, because work, there's a hierarchy. In family, it's more relational and connective.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I think that's probably true. I know even when you ask me that, I feel like I sort of like have a vision for what I want. Like lately I've been visualizing it in the mornings. Okay, what is the relationship I want with my wife, with each of the kids? What I like, I just kind of picture us smiling and like having fun together. And that's been helpful, just doing that. Um, I know for me, that hierarchy thing definitely gets in the way sometimes. Like I want to be uh, obeyed, right? I want the kids to do what I say. I know that definitely gets in the way sometimes. I did a podcast last week, just kind of looking at my own history and kind of finding some of the things that were probably coming up from my past, and like that helped a lot. Just kind of like recognize, okay, there's some things from my growing up that I'm kind of carrying over that I don't want to carry over, and that's been really helpful. Um, but yeah, so like if you were working with me, like what would be kind of the steps? And I've gone through a little bit of your program online, and I want to keep going through it. It's really good. Um, but like as far as creating that vision and then, working towards it, how do you go about doing that?
We what we found, when I started to we started to write our vision for family and really our curriculum. I said, you know what, I want to teach family in 5 minutes, or I want to teach family in 5 years, because both are true. We need to be able to have a vision for family in 5 minutes, but it really takes years to implement, because we're learning things. And what you just said is really important, is we first learn things about ourselves. We tend to want to change our kids. God says, nah, I'm going to work on you, because, we say at Crazy Cool Family, that in order to be a good father, you first have to be a good son.
Mm,
And that son is of the king, not son of your parents,
right.
but you got to be a son of the king. And if you're not willing to be if you're going to be an angry person, you're going to be an angry father.
Yeah.
If you're going to be a generous person, you're going to be a generous father. And so the first thing is, and when I sit people down, I'm like, we talk about really two words in the 5 minute spill is relationships and culture. Notice I didn't say anything about obedience yet, although obedience is a goal. I didn't say anything about control yet, although having control of your family and having order is good. But what Jesus said, it's interesting. And this is one of the things that was a big shift for us, because I was definitely a control, teaching, lecturing.
Yeah.
I was that parent that was going to make sure my kids knew it and they knew everything. But what I found is that when they asked Jesus what was most important, he said love. In Matthew 22, they said, Jesus, what's the most important commandment? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, who's your most important neighbor? It's that little girl down the hall. It's that wife you're sleeping with. I mean, those are our most important neighbors. And he said, basically, the connection's most important, that love is most important. And think about, I always do business analogies with my guys. And it's like, in business, they say, if you'll do the right things, profit will result. If you focus on profit, many times you will miss out on the goal because you're so focused on the money, you neglect the people and all the things.
Right.
Same thing in family. If you want obedience, connection is the focus. And what happens is we focus too much on, it's not that we don't focus on obedience, but we focus too much on control, obedience, the outside forces, and we don't focus enough on connection and then building a culture, kind of like a greenhouse. We teach dads and moms, let's build a greenhouse, an environment where these relationships can flourish, where there's trust, where you're listening, where we're disciplining them in a way that is constructive rather than destructive. And so that's where it comes down to relationships and culture. And then really we go that into three commitments, which is pursue God. Our most important relationship is always our relationship with God. Mm-hmm. Build relationships and create culture. And that's the 5-minute version of what we're trying to teach. If everything we do builds off of that, it builds off pursue God first, build your relationship with God, build your relationships in your family, and then create a culture where those relationships can flourish like that greenhouse. If parents will focus on those three things, then the result will be kids that love Jesus. The result will be kids that obey. The result will be kids that feel safe around you. All the things that we're trying for, or when we try it like Jesus says to try it, those things will be the result. Does that make sense?
Yeah, awesome. So, yeah, I'm thinking with the guys in my program. So we work mainly on marriage and issues that come up there, but same thing we teach, like number one, build that relationship with God, get your self-esteem from God. A lot of times what happens in a marriage is you're trying to borrow that self-esteem from your wife and she gets tired of it. But even with the kids, right, that obedience thing can be just like within yourself trying to prove I'm in charge, and instead of getting that value from God. And then what you said about relationships, like personally, I've noticed that, like, hey, especially my oldest son, he's 17 now. He'll be moving out pretty soon. I don't have a lot of time left to do a good job. And I think I've fallen into a lot of negative patterns. One thing my wife is worried about, right, is that the kids won't really want to come back. And that's on me mainly, which she's right. She's 100% right. And so with relationships, I've been trying to just like ask him a question every day. Just recently been doing that.
Well, let's dig into that just a little bit, if you don't mind. Like, yep. What is it that when she says, you said she's 100% right, and she's saying they won't want to come back because of you? Why?
It's these, like, my son told me this just last week. Like, this is a good time to be having this conversation because, like, just last week, my son was like, yeah, I don't like, I lately have been telling him, like, we want you to live close when you grow up. And he's like, I don't really want to, because we have these arguments where it's just like, I need to be right. I need to be heard. If he's not, like, it turns into a big fight.
Right.
And, yeah, like, I don't want to be like that, but I've been falling into that for sure. So, yeah, just this past week, been trying to do some of the things you're talking about, right? Like listen more, try to be there with them more, just ask them a question every day, build that relationship. And it's already like making a difference.
Yeah, and I exactly, and that's another thing is, it's already making a difference. Like so often, and I want to relate this back to a concept that we teach a lot. That one, and it will take time. You start to think about a different approach. I had a guy tell me one time he'd been married for 14 years, and he said, "I'm ready to do something different in my marriage." I said, "Okay, here's some things to do." And he went back and he said he came back a month later and he goes, "It didn't work. It's worse than before." And I said, "Hey, buddy, how long you been trying this?" He said, "A month." I said, "How long you been married?" He said, 14 years. I said, "Okay, now there's your dichotomy. When you've tried this for 6 months, come back and see me because you've been digging a hole for 14 years."
Yep.
He didn't listen to me. He got a divorce because he wasn't willing to do the things that he but so let's talk about, like with your 17-year-old, one of the things you said was, "I want to be heard." And basically a lot of things are what a lot of dads are saying at that point. I want him to hear me and believe I'm right and do it my way.
Yeah.
That's, so often that's really what we're saying. It's more than just being heard. Well, what we would do is say, what if you listen to them and over time try to make that be their idea? What if so often if you ask the right questions and you come, kids are smart. Your 17-year-old, he's smart. He wants to do good things in his life. He wants to be productive. He wants to, but so often it takes longer, but to listen and things. But what if we believe our goal is not for us to be heard and to be right, but for them to buy in and for it to be their idea? Well, then all of a sudden you take a completely different approach to reach in the heart of your child. It's harder. And it's also, one of the reasons we do that, I think, is because we control it. And we say, you will hear this and you will do it. And if not, there's going to be major consequences to you. Well, okay, he's going to do that till he's 18. And
Right.
when he goes to college, it's gone,
Yeah.
One of the things that I tell people a lot is I've sent 6 kids to college now. I've got 1 left at home. I've never worried about them going to college because I knew their heart. They weren't perfect. They had issues. Well, I knew they loved the Lord, but I knew they were going to make good decisions because I knew them and I knew it was inside them, not inside me.
Yeah. 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 And then you mentioned like, loving the Lord for our family. We recently, kind of went through like a faith transition. Let's say, we grew up in the Mormon Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My wife and I, a couple years ago now, have stepped away from that for various reasons. And so yeah, it's been kind of a rough time for our family, kind of trying to reestablish, okay, like what does serving God look like? What do we believe in exactly? And so, I guess, how do you encourage that without having it feel forced on the kids?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what we grew up with. Like, no, this is the way, and you better do it, with religion and all that. So, how do you create, like you said, the culture or that relationship without having to be like, oh, you better do this?
Well, I think, there's a couple of examples I think of. I've never, um, been involved in LDS or whatever, seen people come out of that. But, I think it relates to a couple of things. One of them is there's a couple at our church, just an amazing couple. And they went from probably 5 or 6, 7 years ago. He was an executive at a medical company and they were just living a very, very, very secular life. The good people just living a very secular life. And one day the Lord just put it on his heart to go to church. And now and immediately within like 6 months, they had a radical conversion, where they went from being totally secular to both the husband and the wife becoming strong believers. And I mean, the dude didn't even own a Bible. I mean, he had to go buy a Bible. It was just nothing in his life was. And so, I've walked with him through their children going through that, and the adjustments. And one child, the oldest child, like, you were saying, the oldest child didn't respond well. The other ones did. And it's because they're younger and they're able to, see it differently or whatever. But, there's just been, as I've walked with him through it, and he's a very smart guy and very relational, I'm just like, it's a lot of conversations. It's, when you're going through, and the second example I think of is, I'm not the believer. I am a much better believer today than I was 30 years ago when I started this journey. And so one of the things that we learned was that I just wrote a article about this for a newspaper that I'm a contributor to. We call it just along the way, that that life happens along the way, and that when we can just talk with our kids along the way and let them in on what we're going through and our struggles and where we are, just like you guys went through a faith crisis, that's what you called it. Well, what are you going to talk about that with your kids? And as they see you walk through it, then it becomes more real to them. And you're seeing how God is real in a different way. Yep. And he's not a rules-based God. He's a grace-based God. It's not something you perform for. It's something that he loves you. You're a child of the King, and we perform out of who we are versus because of what we want to become, And so, as you share your heart with them about that, they go, oh yeah, I see that. Versus, so often we're scared that our kids aren't going to turn out well. And so we lecture them, and we do a lot to try to control them, when in reality, especially, you're at 14 and 12 with your next couple. They're on that bridge between looking back to childhood, but wanting to be an adult, and they're looking at that bridge going, I want to be treated like an adult. Well, okay, let's talk to them like they're adults. And what would we do with an adult? We would share our feelings with them, things like that. And over time, we find that when we do that, again, it goes into getting them to buy in. Last thing I'll say is that I tell parents a lot, you got a small business in your family, and quit focusing so much on operations and focus on sales. You're selling a way of life to your kids.
Yeah.
And that means, and who do we like as a salesman? Do we like the pushy guy that comes up and, has all our answers? No, we like the guy who takes an interest in us,
right,
and really is genuinely about helping us buy that car that we need, or the house or the mortgage or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. No, I like that, that analogy a lot. Yeah, that's one of the things we talk about in the program when guys are like struggling in their marriage, and they're like, no, just like give me another chance and all this, versus like I talk about used car salesmen and like, do you want the used car salesman that like is pushy, doesn't like expose the flaws of the car, or the one that comes and says, yeah, like these are the issues, but then also like fixes himself to be a better car to choose, right? But anyway, I like that. It's a good, as a business owner guy, that makes a lot of sense. If you want someone to do a certain thing that's, again, like aligned with what's best for them and what's good for them, not just because, oh, this is what I say and you need to do it.
Well, and especially, you deal with a lot with marriage, and I have 4 daughters, and one time they were my first 4 kids. So it was me and 5 women. And I mean, I was like, what in the world, God, what have you done to me, God? Because I just didn't have a clue, and I would feel like I couldn't even breathe in a bad mood, or they would just scatter like roaches in the light. I mean, it was just, and how do I reach these women? And, and I really, at first, for many years, I was frustrated by it, because I was like, literally the standard's too high. I can't do that. But God had a work he wanted to do in me. And today, My kids would say that have gone from, especially the older girls that knew me back then, that I've gone from being a pretty intense dad to one of the most encouraging people they know.
Mhm.
But it's a metamorphosis that took time, belief, energy, practice. Those are the things. But it's possible. But that's what I'm talking about. You got to have a vision for it. There was a time that I said, you know what, my anger is alienating my daughters. I need to become a more encouraging, inspiring dad and a less critical one.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I had to start working at it and praying about it and failing a lot in order to become who I've become today.
Yeah. Yeah. And even the way you're saying that, like that resonates with me. That's more who I want to be versus, yeah, the angry, you didn't do it this way, um, kind of thing. So, um, yeah, so focus on God, relationships, and then culture. So when you say culture, is that more like kind of rituals you have, or like what does that involve?
Well, I think that the easiest way for me to explain it is that culture is a group of values. So, and what's a value? Value means what's important to us. So, for example, a value we have in our home is we want our kids to be best friends. Okay. So that's taken a lot of work and a lot of effort, but because that value is there, we're going to create a culture where our kids see that's important. A value may be that just what I said, I'm going to be a listening parent. So in our home, we're going to have, value could be, we want our home to be a place we have God conversations. So therefore, and my wife and I have talked about this, and values evolve over the years, and it's a great conversation. You want to have more sex, guys, have values conversations about family with your wife. I mean, they love that. I mean, it's like it's a way to their heart because they want you to lead and they want you to be involved and be interested in family. Well, have values conversations, and then you go, okay, now we want to have God conversations in our home. So my wife and I started having more God conversations with our kids, maybe at bedtime. Here's what, I've got this problem at work, and well, let's pray about it together. Or I was reading this scripture and here's what God taught me today. Or, and ask, what about you? What are you praying for? What's your issue? Things like that. Well, today, if you fast forward 20 years or so, anytime our kids get together, they're going to have God conversations. Why? It's because the culture of their home, that's what they did. And, and how many times what kind of culture are we building? Many times when kids come home, it's the most critical place they're going to be at all day. And we don't mean to. I mean, parents aren't going, well, I want to be, like you say, we don't say, I want to be a critical lecturing oaf.
Yeah.
We don't do that. But it's the result if we're not thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so you think about culture being, what are my values? What's important? You just said, I want to be an inspiring dad. Okay. That's a great value. I want to create a culture where my kids see an inspiring dad. Well, what does it mean to be an inspiring dad? Well, I'm going to have to listen more. I'm going to have to be more encouraging. I'm going to have to cut down on my anger. I'm going to have to, believe differently in order to be. I can think about being an inspiring dad all the time, but unless I'm going to take some action steps to making that happen, that's not going to build the culture in my home.
Yeah. 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 And I feel like the kind of the tools that we teach in our program can help with that, where we kind of look at, okay, where are situations that I tend to go to anger, for example, like and then what's behind that, right? What's the thought process behind that? What are my intentions? And then choosing that new model, right? That new way of thinking, like, okay, the result I want is for them or for me to be encouraging, right? What do I need to think, feel, and do? And then just like practice that, like imagine it happening, rehearse it mentally. So, yeah, I like that idea a lot. I think it, can plug it right into kind of some of the things we teach in our program. But
I think of it a lot as the relationship piece is the why. I mean, that Jesus says that if you have strong relationships, if you love God, love others, that's going to be the best for you. Jesus said in John 10:10, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So, and he says, how you do that, what's most important is you love God and love others. So we believe that, and that's kind of the why. The culture becomes the how. It becomes the very practical ways. What are my values? What am I after? As just like with your curriculum, when we dig into ours, we're like, okay, how do you become a better listener? How do you help your siblings be best friends?
Yeah.
How do you become a more encouraging parent? How do you discipline towards self-control rather than parent control?
Yeah.
And then we can get into the but if you don't have the vision for it first, and you don't have the values and the unity with your spouse, it becomes very difficult to implement. I mean, and most guys can relate to a business setting. If your business isn't unified, if your business doesn't have the same values and they aren't going in the same direction, when the sales guy's out for himself and he's beating up, the accounting department and everybody's got all this conflict, nobody wants to go to work there. Yeah. It's the same way in our home, and we have here's a cool deal. God handpicked you for the job of leading your family. And he wasn't surprised by the 5 kids you have. He didn't make any mistakes. And he's handpicked you and put the exact right kids for your family. And every dad we're talking to. Well, guess what? That means he sets you up for success. He sets you up exactly, and he will give you everything you need. And so basically, and if we do the job right, we will have a much, much greater chance of success. We have a lot of influence. So, man, I like those odds.
Yeah.
I like that where it's set up like that, where God loves me. He's given me the kids I'm supposed to have, the wife I'm supposed to have. He gives me all the tools and resources if I can trust in him. Man, I'll tell you, the statistics show that 60 to 70% of kids leaving Christian homes will not follow the Lord. That's a horrible statistic to me. When I was at your stage, a little bit younger, I said, dude, that ain't happening to me. I'm going 7 for 7. Or I'm going to die trying. And they're going to drag me off that field, bloody, battered and bruised and exhausted. And I'm going to have given it my all. And at the end of the day, I want to win. And God's set it up for me to have a great chance of winning. And you know what? I have. And not that everybody's going to win every time, and not that my kids are perfect, but we have a great chance of success if we'll do the right things.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the end of the day, if you can say, yeah, like I lived in that way, like I was as encouraging as I could be. I was trying to follow Christ. I was building those relationships with the kids. I feel like even if I'm just thinking for my own, oldest son in particular right now, like even if for the next few years or whatever, right, he's like, yeah, I don't believe in God, I'm, whatever. Like if he can see, if we're building a relationship where I'm showing love for him and love for God, like I can take comfort in that. And that will make it probably more likely that, he'll see, wow, like Dad actually did change when he started doing this more, and, create an interest, kind of like you were saying, like the idea, kind of plant the idea that, believing in God can change you.
A big change in your life.
Yeah.
And that, especially when you go from a more legalistic God to a more grace-filled God. And I say, we do parenting not in days and weeks, but in months and years. And so, and a lot of times the transformation happens in the parents, and then later it happens in the children. Yep. And so, and also just for people that have older kids, especially, or teenagers that are, not following the Lord, there's always hope. And, there's always hope. And a lot of times we need to make those changes to becoming more connective. And I rarely see a dad who says, yeah, I'm a super encouraging. Most 99% of dads that come to us are, including me, are too critical. Yep. And so everybody's making adjustments, but as you make the adjustments, I tell a story of my second daughter. Her name's Madeline. And and Madeline was about 16 when we were 16 or 17, and we were in her car. She was driving. I never will forget it. And she said, I was encouraging her. I was saying, Madeline, I'm really glad that you're a wonderful teenage girl. I'm super excited for, where God's working in your life. And, we had changed schools and she was going through some transition. And she said, Dad, you were a big part of that. And I go, oh wow, okay, tell me more. You're complimenting me as a dad. I like this. But she said something I'll never forget. And she said years ago, I didn't think I could do anything right in your eyes. Mm. She said, now, today, I don't think I can do anything wrong. Mm. And I was like, that is the story I tell to dads, to say, that's where you need to be. Mm. That your kid, you're so calm, your kid, what did God say to Jesus when he baptized him? He said, this is my son, whom I love. In him I am well pleased. I claim you, I love you, and I believe in you. If you can do that to your kids, they are going to set the world on fire. Hmm. They're going to most likely follow you, versus we tell them you're not enough. You have to earn my love. Things like that push them into things that it's not the way God does it to us. He says, hey, you're a child of the king, go live like it.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to tell our kids. That's why we were talking about, I don't know if it was in the podcast or before, we're talking about identity. We give identity to our kids first. And then when God comes to give them identity, they're like, oh yeah, of course, God loves me. Yeah. He created me just like you love me.
Hmm. Yeah. 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 If we can kind of show that. Yeah, I think a lot of it, like you said, kind of comes back to that movement from the rules-based earn my love God to like the grace-filled God, like you're my son, I'm well pleased in you.
Well, and we start to think if we do that, they're going to get a big head, or we're not tough enough on them. And it's not that it's not that we're not tough. I tell people all the time, my standards for my kids are as higher than yours. Promise you. It's a different method to get there. It's God's ways instead of the world's way. It's doing it Jesus's way instead of the Pharisees' way.
Yeah.
The Pharisees had high standards, and right. and there was a lot of good in what they wanted to follow God, and they wanted to do things, but it created a world that was really rules based and was very meticulous and very difficult for people, and it wasn't life giving. Yeah. Jesus said, "I'm going to come in and revolutionize that." And if he wants to revolutionize his world, then I think we probably want to revolutionize our family.
Right. Yeah. Love it. Awesome. Well, so, as we're doing this, it's funny the way, like, I believe like Don and I met at this time, like it's a connection it's a God connection is what I feel like. Cause as far as my personal journey goes, right. Like, it took a long time to get my marriage to a great spot. And now it is like, we're more connected than ever. Things are really good. But yeah, like the family piece needs help. And I feel like this method and all that is really like what I've been looking for. That's Christian centered, but in the way you're talking about, like that's about love and connection and like making that shift. So I think this is, and Don and I had talked before about like working together somehow in the future with like my clients and helping us make that transition, like because I think that for a lot of the guys is the transition, right? From, okay, my marriage is good, but now like, let's expand that and make sure the family has that kind of culture that we want. But like, I have to make that journey first if I'm going to like help anybody else do it.
We're working on some things where we could do more. I love it that you're doing, individual groups, coaching things that are more, because it really does, Suzanne and I, my wife, we talk about, man, it would be so great if we could just sit down with a family, all their kids, and just really go over with them, and nobody has the time to do that, with courses and groups and and things that, and then people have to pay for it and they, couldn't afford it and all that stuff. But I mean, but I like for you, what I would say is, we have the way we do it right now is we have it's actually a free membership site called Basecamp. And so Basecamp, and we actually have a book too. I mean, if people want to go to Amazon, you can type in Crazy Cool Family. And if you're a reader like me, that's what I would do. I would read the book and I would just say, give me the book. Let me do it myself. And, I was telling you before the podcast, I talked to Dave Ramsey's group a couple months ago, and they said that in their research, which is millions and millions of people, that if someone doesn't pay for it, and if they don't have a leader, 4% of people will finish their course. But if they pay for it and they have a leader, 74% of people will finish the course. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, and I am one of those 4%. I will go figure it out, and I love to read and I go research things, but I've found that I'm weird, basically. So, and according to everybody else. And so, but that's kind of the way we set up Basecamp. But in that, it's free. And also it's got a bunch of core courses in there. And what I would tell you to do is, hey, just go start. Each course has a series of short videos that was designed purposefully short. So there's one concept at a time that we can drip it into people.
Yep.
So for you overachievers like me that like to go research yourselves, just go into Basecamp. It's free. We'll put it in the show notes, the link to it, I'm sure.
Yep.
And then it's on our website, crazycoolfamily.com. But what you can do is just go in and start watching the videos one at a time. And then, and don't, you can binge watch them, but you're going to be drinking out of a fire hose. It's great. It's set up to where you just maybe watch one a week or, one couple in a week or whatever, and watch them with your spouse. Again, more sex. And so let's do something to where you start to get these concepts dripped into you. And over time, you're going to find that you'll create a new vision for your family and new strategies as a result.
Yeah, I love it. And then with your, with the program, is there like ways to reach out to you and Suzanne, get support, or how does that part work?
Well, for right now, I would say, the Lord's just telling me to do more to connect with people. Right now, it's simply, we'll put my email in the show notes, and you can ask us if, right now, what we do a lot is we work with churches, and basically we kind of build champions that help to facilitate groups and things. And so, but, I'm trying to come out more with, in the next 6 months to a year or something, more like you're doing with specific programs. But right now we kind of do it more osmosis and developing through relationships.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So more to come. I'm definitely going to go through it. Maybe kind of, if you're up for it, Don, maybe we do a check-in podcast now and then, kind of, we can.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
share
we'll put
people
that email address
progress.
in there right now. If someone wanted to do more than just go through Basecamp or get our book, and we also have a podcast too. But I mean, then I would just say email me, and we're doing a lot of things where, maybe I just kick off a group one time, where a group's meeting and I'll get them started. I'll train or I'll meet with somebody that's leading a small group. I was just talking to a guy this morning, he got a small group. I said, man, let's just sit down and talk for 30 minutes. I'll show you everything to do, and then you can launch it. And it's super easy to do with your small group or a group of men, whatever that is. So that's just, look to sign up at Basecamp. And then also my email's there, and reach out to me with anything. It's just Don at crazycoolfamily.com. Reach out to me with any kind of needs you might have, and we'll figure it out.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, definitely appreciate your time. And so again, that website's crazycoolfamily.com. Excuse me. The link will be in the show notes as well. And thanks, Don, and looking forward to you guys getting involved and creating that, like you said, the family culture where people feel loved and valued, and kids are best friends, and they're loving God, loving each other. That's what I know. I want that. I know that a lot of the guys listening want that too. So it's great the work you're doing, and glad we were able to connect and share this.
Hey, man, and I love it that you guys are going after, as a married for 30 something years person, that I feel like the last 5 to 7 years of our marriage have been the best
Mm.
because we did some things intentionally. We have a marriage coach. We're going to talk to them tomorrow, actually, and we've had them for about 4 years. A couple that just helps us develop and it's so I love what you guys are doing too. That just to pursue the intimacy, pursue emotionally, physically, and just going deeper with your marriages. That's awesome.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thanks. And yeah, so we'll put all the information in the show notes. But yeah, stay strong, man. We will see you next episode.